Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Conversations Cafe. I am your host, Carl Evans, Senior Director of Operations at Hope for the Day. Tonight, May 28th, we have an interesting episode for you titled Dana Being Dana and HFTD. And what we're doing tonight is a little different from our regularly scheduled programming. We're promoting a collaboration Hope for the Day had the privilege of taking part in on a community access TV show called Dana Being Dana, which is filmed and aired on NCTV, that's Naperville Community TV in Naperville, Illinois. And the episode was dedicated to suicide prevention and general awareness. And Hope for the Day, specifically myself, joined a panel of very talented, intelligent, and skilled people who come from very different intersections on mental health and suicide prevention within the greater community. And we touched on both from clinical standpoint, lived experience standpoint, people who are active through advocacy, and dove into the different sorts of nuances around suicide prevention, both within the general community that NCTV airs to, and also just in a broader standpoint. And this episode, we wanted to celebrate and acknowledge that collaboration and talk about life after that episode, because we were planning to do a lot of in-person viewing parties within the greater community that NCTV airs to. And we had obviously recorded this program in February of 2020, long before this sort of pandemic had changed everyone's plans. So what we decided to do was we had to sort of reshuffle our logistics and how are we going to make the most use of this. And we've created different dynamic ways of trying to keep people engaged in that conversation. And as we begin to roll those out in the coming weeks, we thought this would be a great way to kick off celebrating the work that was produced by Dana Michelle, who is the host and producer of Dana Being Dana. So before we get into this episode tonight, I want to bring on with us Hope for the Day's education leader and co-producer of Conversations Cafe, Mike Vinopal. We're going to be talking a little bit about upcoming education events. And then we're going to go to an interview with Dana Michelle, who isn't able to join us tonight. And then we're going to be coming back live to speak with a gentleman who has a deep level of experience in supporting suicide prevention as a member of, someone who answers calls for the Suicide Lifeline. But before we get into that, we're going to have Mike Vinopal join us and talk about some things that Hope for the Day is doing programming-wise that's free and available digitally online. Hey, Mike, thanks for being back on again.
What's up?
Great to see you, buddy.
I miss you, bud. Good to see you each week, at least.
Absolutely. Mike, let's talk first about upcoming education. These past 2 weeks, if you've joined us on Conversations Cafes, we have debuted 2 programming modules that have been cooking in the Hope for the Day sort of laboratory for almost a year plus. And they're 86 the Silence and Project R.E.D team. And these 2 programming tools are designed to focus on our proactive education within very specific intersections. And the difference between this and our general education is that these programs are designed to empower individuals through the lived experience in these specific intersections to go and carry the education and conversation forward. So 86 Silence, if you've seen on our social media, is a program dedicated to bringing proactive prevention education into the hospitality, culinary, and service world. That includes your breweries, your restaurants, that includes being a service member, working in the back kitchen in the front, and all those sort of dynamic places. 86 to Silence is produced by a group of people who have experience both from service and bartending and being chefs and being at the corporate level, the front end, the back end. And they're dedicated to sort of breaking the silence around unaddressed mental health challenges within those communities. And Project R.E.D team, to the same effect, is a program that dedicates proactive prevention education within the intersection of individuals who have made a commitment to put their time, effort, and lives on the line for the safety and protection of the community. So that is military, law enforcement, EMS, first responders. And that program is facilitated by individuals with lived experience within those types of communities. So Mike, what is the education output for the general audience and for people who want to get involved with 86 Silencer Project Red Team?
Of course, my dog's going to bark while we got the announcement going on. Hopefully that's not too distracting. If it is, I can close the door right quick. Live streams, you make it happen. Essentially, we have so much to celebrate. On Wednesday, yesterday, Ryan Shannon did the first community call to action for Project Red Team. So Project Red Team is taking education and outreach and peervention and approaching it by empowering voices from those communities to build on what we've been able to achieve in the community at large. By empowering those peers, we can get really into the nuances, the unique contributing factors of what it's like in those intersections and those experiences. Ryan Shannon is a Navy vet who has worked with me and Hope for the Day for the last 2 years to really make sure we do this program, as we love to say in the words of our buddy Mark, the right way, not right away. So we took our time, made sure we were going to do it right, and very powerful, engaging presentation with that same flavor of approachability and conversational tones, inviting people to share their experiences and being peer-led about it. Even though we're bringing clinical information that's clinically backed to you guys, the idea of learning your role in the community is so important, so you can press the conversation in your own way, in your own sphere of influence. So with that, I would like to have more people involved in Project Red Team. So if you know people from the military or first responder communities or their family members and support systems, let them know the last Wednesday of the month, June 24th, Ryan will be leading another conversation for that crew and that program. Ultimately, we got a lot of cool education coming up. I get to do a partnership with Comedy Gives Back to help to impact the comedian community, to make sure that we honor all the talented people we've lost in the entertainment community, specifically comedians, and do some good there. Really great. And then Saturday, we have our last Saturday offering of Things We Don't Say. Our community partner spotlight goes to Remix Presents the Lifeline. It's a wonderful lady, an agent of impact out in Colorado. That she's amazing. Remix Presents. She started a Lifeline that's a free text line for motivation, some positivity. You can send like a different menu of emojis. So check that out. Remix.com. That's spelled REMICKZ.com. Pretty awesome partners doing stuff. Tune into Saturday Morning Tunes on Sip of Hope's Instagram every Saturday morning, starting at 11 a.m. Central Standard Time, to see our community celebrating self-expression and continuing to offer and raise the visibility of resources. But starting in June, we're going to be switching to weekly education on Tuesdays at 11 a.m. like we've been doing, and on Thursdays at 1 p.m. So mark your calendars. Every Tuesday and Thursday, you can get educated so that you can be proactive with mental health in your own life for yourself and for the people that you care most about. I'm really hoping that anybody involved in the food and beverage industry will join us on Monday, June 1st for 86 The Silence education, led by Janine Wise of the Frontera Restaurant Group. She's also the culinary assistant to Chef Rick Bayless. Just a general badass. You got to see her on last week's episode, and excited to empower more people from that community going forward as well, with some monthly education programming. So lots of good stuff. Every Thursday you can come here too and get educated with my man Carl. But that's all for now.
Thank you so much, Mike. And with that, make sure that if you would like to join in on any of our free online education tools, you can go to purevention.org That's purevention, all one word, .org. And there you can see our constantly updated list where Hope for the Day is presenting more than 20 plus hours of free online mental health education and engaging work that is part of not just dealing with life in a quarantine status, but is part of our ongoing mission to drive home education for folks and make it as accessible as possible. So again, thank you very much, Mike.
.org. I put it on my name. I renamed myself.
That's perfect. And Mike's going to stay with us for a half second. What we're going to go to next is a pre-recorded interview I did with the host of Dana Being Dana Michelle. And we talk about both the inspirations for her producing a suicide-centric show and also talking about how even though a lot of our plans to do a lot of in-person community interactions to promote and celebrate and watch the show together with the community were disrupted by this COVID situation. There's also seems to be a silver lining that the episode has sort of taken a life on its own because people have been able to engage it at home. And it's been a tool to help support starting conversations. So what you're going to see next is a recording I did with Dana Michelle, trying to get involved with her very, very busy and active schedule. We were able to sneak away for about 15 minutes to talk about the episode. So we're going to be going to that now.
This house. And so I wanted to take responsibility for that as kind of the head of my household, in making sure that everybody was good. You know, I think one of the silver linings is having this episode that we've done, the timing, right? I mean, this was right before the shelter in place, and who knew that it would, you know, come to this, and how that's impacted mental health in our world, not just the US, but the impacts are startling. And it's been awesome to partner with Hope for the Day, and have you a part of the show and be able to talk about these issues and this topic in hopes of reaching people and helping people and making a difference, especially now.
Yeah, that's such a amazing point to bring up, is that when we were first putting this show together, we hoped that Hope for the Day as an organization hoped to also share it once it was recorded and it was live, to share it and create opportunities for in-person community watch parties and things like that. Not just to promote, but as a strategic point of the value of doing these kind of recordings is the durability, that you can re-show it. And the biggest obstacle to effective mental health care is, unfortunately, a sort of a silence that's perpetuated by stigmas and taboos about why we don't talk about it. And this becomes an easy, accessible tool to start conversations and drive them. And now that we're in this sort of socially distanced reality, it's very interesting how we had to retool our plans and have come back with a sort of new way in which we hope to engage people with the recordings. But I think it'd be important to know, before we saw all of these realities, the pandemic has created a sort of universal, and Hope for the Day to sort of give people a better understanding of mental health discussions. We use a lot of vernacular that sort of washes or tries to put things on a one-to-one basis, takes the academic level barrier out of it, and we call it a psychological injury instead of trauma, because people can hear trauma and think it means something. It has to be very visible and intense, like a car crash or something. But even if you haven't experienced loss from COVID, just having to not have the agency to go out and go where you want can create a psychological strain. That's as much an injury as like breaking a leg or twisting an ankle. So we're in a shared psychological injury that we feel in different scales. Some people through certain privileges might be more insulated from the impact. Other people, because of the social cultural realities, maybe even more directly impacted. But when you first put together your episode, Dana being Dana covers a lot of different topics and a lot of different things. So what was the sort of motivations for why now to put on this episode?
Yeah.
Or construct this episode rather, excuse me. And we're back. So the interview seems to have cut out a little bit, and that's all right. We'll figure it out. There was a little bit of a buffer on the recording. And we're back. So the interview seems to have cut out. So what Dana and I were getting to talk about was how she had been starting to study and learn more about the impact of mental health and untreated issues had been impacting communities in a way that had been not too visible for a lot of different individuals. And what inspired her at the time was really looking at the chance that something that hopefully always talks about, which is that people weren't really talking about mental health and suicide prevention until an instance blew up right in their face, and then it becomes the topic of the day. And her inspirations were largely to try and approach the topic before it adversely impacted, or without there having to be a central reason why. And I was hoping we would be able to get the rest of the video on, but quite frankly, I don't want to dice it and have it just buffering and have you just watching a buffering screen for the remaining of the episode. So hopefully I'll be able to produce it and put it on to our YouTube channel later. But to keep things moving, one of the guests on Dana Being Dana's show that joined Hope for the Day and the other very informed individuals was a gentleman who has dedicated a great deal of time as in the call centers of the suicide lifelines. And for those who may not be aware, the suicide lifelines, the way they work is that if you call the national free number, it doesn't just send you to a central call station in New York or Washington, D.C. It's actually a network of call centers all across the country, which based on, the area codes where you're calling from, it'll channel you to a place. So, if you were someone who was calling 1-800-273-TALK, which is 1-800-273-TALK, and TALK is 8255. I used to have that memorized right off the top of my head. When you call the Lifeline, there's folks who can pick up in each state, and this is an individual who's sort of a face behind those calls. And I thought what would be really exciting to have him on as a guest is that when we talk about being proactive, we want to have this discussion before mental health adversely impacts our lives. But But the reality is that's a movement. Hopefully Today is trying to achieve a movement to bring people into a proactive mindset and bring communities and institutions into a proactive mindset. But we still live in a society that is very much reactive, and it's very much, we do not see mental health challenges until people communicate and reveal them, which unfortunately is often in a time of crisis, when they need immediate help. That's usually when people start to access supports and tools for suicide prevention. So we wanted to talk to someone who's on that front line, and the gentleman, Roger, who's going to be joining us, fits the bill. And he was someone who was on the episode of Dana Being Dana that we'll be promoting and have an available link in our different media. So before we begin, let's make sure we can see Roger and hear Roger. Roger. Hello.
Good evening. How are you?
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us, Roger. We obviously had to bail out a little bit early on the pre-recorded interview with Dana that we will make sure we get it posted up in our media. But Dana led the charge on her very well-produced show for NCTV, where she guided us through discussions on different nuances and intersections within mental health. And obviously you participated on those panels, a different one for myself, but all in the same episode. And what was fantastic in having you on today is that oftentimes when we're talking about mental health and suicide prevention, we're talking about concepts and philosophies and strategies to be proactive. But I think it's also important to talk about some of the more concrete technical sides, of this situation, because the fact is if the biggest obstacle to effective mental health care is a silence, going out there and doing outreach and education, one of the two things that we really need to be teaching people is, just because someone has resources, a lifeline, they have the number, if they have a Hope for the Day resource card, right, or something where it has all the information on it, or you see it online and you've got the helpline numbers and there's other folks types of numbers, that doesn't mean someone's going to call. Right. Just because they have the number doesn't mean they're going to call. And right. The other part about this is, even if you can educate someone on the resources, that doesn't mean people know when they're supposed to reach out for help. And those are the big mountains that our education tries to drive home. And being proactive is like trying to get to the earliest point to reach out. But the fact is that there's still a lot of people who are staying silent on things they've been dealing with for a long time. So let's talk a little bit about, first, give us a little bit of an understanding of your background in the whole prevention mental health world.
How much time do you have?
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is that I am just a volunteer on the suicide hotline, and I came to it 17 years ago quite accidentally. I was invited to the organization where I volunteer, Suicide Prevention Services of America in Batavia, Illinois. And about 18 years ago, I was invited to talk to their board of directors. I knew nothing about suicide or suicide prevention, but I had a son at that time who was a junior in high school, about to go off to college. And when I met with the board, what I realized is that most of the adults sitting around the table had lost children to suicide, and it just frightened me. So I asked them what I could do to learn something about this topic. And they said, well, we'll train you to answer calls on our suicide hotline. It's world-class training. It's 80 hours of training. And what we ask in return is that you stay for at least a year, and that's just 4 hours a week. So it's about 200 hours that they've asked you to guarantee. And I did that, but 17 years later, I'm still there because it seems to be such rewarding work. So that's my whole story in relation to suicide prevention. It's not my career, it's not my education, it's none of those things. It's just walking through that door once a week as a member of the community to try to help in whatever way you can.
And I think that's a good thing to I want to highlight there, is that you do not have to have a clinical background to make an impact on mental health and suicide prevention. I think one of the other big issues is getting people involved. A lot of times there's a lot of, well, what do I do? Because we believe we have to have the alphabet soup, or there's the barrier of you can't make an impact. But being an agent of impact on mental health and suicide prevention, there's a lot of formal and informal ways. And being a volunteer for the Lifeline, which is not a simple or short task, it's not something you just pick up sticks and do right away. But volunteering for the Lifeline is very much a powerful way to get involved and contribute your time and energy in the same way that Hope for the Day looks to bring people on and get them involved in outreach. What does the volunteer process look like? You just say, hey, I want to join the Lifeline, and then they put you on the phone right away, or what is it?
No, that would be quite a disaster. As I said, it's roughly 80 hours of training. From my perspective, the most powerful part of that training is the 4-hour shifts. And so a new trainee, because I'm now a trainer, I've been doing this long enough, a new trainee will come in there's a lot of classroom training, a lot of online training, but in the line room training, for the first 4 shifts at 16 hours, the new volunteer will listen to me on the phone, take calls. And then when the call is over, we debrief that so that the new volunteer can talk to me about what made them comfortable, what made them uncomfortable, what they might do differently. Because I'm really big on the fact that the role of the new volunteer is not to become me, it's to figure out how to be themselves on the line. So we do that for 4 weeks, and then we reverse roles. And the new trainee will take calls and I'll listen in. And for a couple of reasons. One, to give them some thoughts and advice at the end of the call. But if they get themselves into difficulty, I'm there to help them, to send them a note, give them ideas of what they can do with the caller. If suddenly they find themselves just kind of frozen, and that happens on occasion. It's especially the first time you take a shift and first time you pick up a call, it can be pretty unnerving. So that's what it looks like. There's a lot of classroom online training, but then in the line room training is listening to me, and then I listen to them. By the time you complete all of that, it's still not necessarily easy work, but you're well prepared.
And sort of continuing on that line of thought, but 17 plus years you've been doing this, someone could get it into their head, and I think it wouldn't necessarily be totally inaccurate. I don't want to seem over dramatic, but when you answer a call, it could feel like, or maybe someone might think you have somebody's life in your hands. But how would you approach that sort of thought?
Well, the bottom line is that the caller is responsible for their own life. And I always keep that in mind. I'm there to help them in whatever way I can, but it's the caller's responsibility. I get asked all the time, has anybody that you've talked to actually chosen suicide? And the answer is, I don't know. I've probably taken 10,000 phone calls. It's been almost 4,000 hours on the line. And as you said, 17 years, I've probably answered 10,000 phone calls. I don't know. It's likely, I suppose, that somebody that I talk to, because we don't fix people on the suicide hotline, they're in a very difficult position when they call us. We help them get to the next minute or to the next day. It's entirely possible that somebody chose suicide after that, but that's their decision. I'm there to do the very best that I can to help them discover what they need to do. We don't have the answers for callers. That my answer, if you were to call the suicide hotline and with your life circumstances, and I tried to tell you from my experience how to fix that, well, there's 2 problems with that. First of all, it sounds like I'm not listening, but my solutions aren't going to help you. So our role on the suicide hotline always is to help the caller decide what they need to do next, to move forward in their life in a positive way. So I don't. There certainly is a sense of responsibility, but I'm not responsible for the decisions that they decide to make. I am responsible for the questions that I ask, and the conversation that we have together, and the relationship we build while we're on the phone. I'm responsible for that. but I can't be responsible for the decisions they make as a result. So as I often say, one of the best things, because as you know, Carl, it's not my education. I'm not a social worker. I'm not a psychologist. I'm just a member of the community. I give myself permission for being imperfect. I do the very best job that I can. And I think after 17 years, I think I do reasonably well with callers, but I'm not perfect. I do the very best that I can for 4 hours. When I close the door behind me, when I leave, I'm just thankful for the opportunity to help in whatever way I can.
I mean, that's absolutely remarkable. And I think you should be commended for, your resilience to carry on that work, and it can leave me slightly speechless in a way. And I might have maybe, from a lived experience advocacy side, just speaking personally, I might have maybe 10 or 15 years in various capacities with working in close proximity to people in various stages of struggle and crisis. And it's, it's so evident, hearing the truth come out in sort of your experience. And it's important for people to hear that and see it if you're watching right now or in days and weeks forward, that it's not about having an answer. And, I think another obstacle to being supportive to people who are experiencing mental health challenges, or let me rephrase that, something I find people who want to be supportive perceive as an obstacle is they hesitate because they think they won't have the answers.
Yes, you're exactly right. And that's the biggest challenge I have with brand new volunteers when they first start to take calls, is they pick up the phone and they freeze because now they've been presented with someone's life circumstances, and the thought going through their mind is, how do I fix this problem? And that's what I go over with the new volunteers over and over and over and over again, is it's not your job. It's their job to fix their life. You're just there to help them figure out what's the next step. And so, owning somebody else's problem on the suicide hotline or in real life, you can't own somebody else's problem. 99.9% of the time, it's just enough to be there. It's just enough to be there with someone who is struggling. That's all.
And that's so critical for people to hear. One of the things that we continuously say, and our founder Johnny Boucher talks about it as a, sort of a call to action for us, is that we're trying to meet people where they are and not where we expect them to be. And thinking that you've got to have like the Rolodex of like the power phrases, or like you're going to be able to magic wand somebody's thing away. That's part and parcel of the thinking you have to have answers, is like thinking that there's some sort of like magic index of wording and phrasing that equips you to go and do this, to go and impact someone. And
it's exactly the opposite, because another one of the phrases I use with volunteers is, don't forget, when you pick up the phone, it's just a conversation between two human beings. That's all it is. A conversation between two human beings. Be curious, ask questions, learn, create a relationship. That's all it is. It's not about a script. As you said, it's not about a list of solutions and you just have to pick the right one and give it to them. None of that stuff applies. It's just a conversation between two human beings.
And that's, I bring this up in almost every Conversations Cafe. It was a quote from the Cruz Harrington family, who were running a Wonder Bus sort of campaign that they did with the Eating Recovery Center and Insight Behavioral Health last summer. And they said this quote that, connection is the currency of wellness. And in support, from what you're saying, being able to be supportive to someone in that moment, in the short moment and whatnot, is really about just respecting the dignity of the individual, right? That's
absolutely.
People say, like, well, what do I say? How do I do something? What do blah, blah, blah. The power of listening, and I love that you bring up about the asking the questions things, because if we're bringing it to like the mathematics of like people who are in pain, a lot of the times, just because somebody says like, you know, I want to harm myself, and no matter how graphic that phrase comes out, if you just say no, you don't want to do that, like, okay, and then
that's almost violent, because now it's clear that you're really not listening. Yeah. So
yeah, and I just you talking about having questions, like I didn't want to talk about that.
You have to end, and this is true in life in general. People ought to end a lot more sentences with that squiggle over a period, a little question mark. Be curious, find out more. You know, somebody calls and says, you know, early on, probably 16 years ago, I've been there 17 years, probably 16 years ago, one of the calls that I got was from a young man who said, you know, I have a gun in my lap, and when we're done talking, I intend to use it. You know, in fact, in that situation, the first question is, would you be willing to put the gun away so that we can have a calm conversation? But then beyond that, it's just, so tell me more. My favorite question, tell me more. That's got to be really, really difficult. I've never experienced anything like that in my life. Could you tell me more about how that makes you feel? What else has happened? I just want to be incredibly curious when somebody calls on the phone and learn everything that I can, because you never know, 20 minutes into the conversation where the caller will say something and you can take them back to something they said 4 minutes into the conversation and say, but wait, hold on for just a moment. You've now told me this, but before you told me that, help me understand how those two things can exist. But you can't do that unless you're really, really listening, so you remember what they said 4 minutes into the conversation when you're 20 minutes in. Deep listening and curiosity and just a million questions is, you know, that's a lot of what we do on the Lifeline.
And I think it's important for folks to get a sense of that, because, you know, hearing us right now isn't going to automatically like invoke you into becoming like a powerful supporter. But I think it's important to demystify what strategy and what, you know, technique is supposed to be when we're talking about being supportive. Because, you know, Roger, talking about the Lifeline as an entity can be very intimidating. So Hope of the Day, for instance, we've got resource cards and we do digital versions and all this kind of stuff. And we might be out, you know, live events is not really a thing that's happening right now, but in 2019, we could boast that we distributed more than 500,000, 250,000, no, but more than 500,000 resources out in live events and things like that, okay? Now, people have that in hand, and they have it somewhere, you know, in their cubicle, in their locker, in their gym bag, etc. But we still have to supplement with education, because as I said earlier, when we came on, there's, okay, the Lifeline, it's okay not to be okay, and the Lifeline is there for me, but that still doesn't mean someone's going to call, because they can get a lot of stigma puts it there or whatever, but like they can get a lot of illusions about what the Lifeline is. They think if they call, that all of a sudden, you know, a SWAT team of cops are going to show up at their place and strap them to a gurney and bring them to a hospital, or they're not sure if their feelings meet the threshold that they're supposed to call the Lifeline. So
let's stop right there, because there is no threshold. There is no threshold. You know, if somebody is just a little bit uneasy, or they've got a friend they're concerned about, there's no threshold. If you're uneasy at all, if you've just got something going on in your life and you're not at all suicidal, call us. You know, we'll work through that. And if we decide that the Lifeline, you know, there's a better resource for you than the Lifeline, we'll get you to that place. But don't ever hesitate to call. Like I say, think of it as there is no threshold. If you want to call, please call. We will talk with you. And I love what you said earlier also, Carl, is that now there's 150 call centers and they all have different policies. And let's be honest. I mean, I know how our call center works, and most of them work the same way. If you call and even if you tell me that you are suicidal, I'm not on the phone with the police until I think you're not safe. If you're safe and the call ends, and I'm convinced as the volunteer that you are safe for now, we're not going to send the police. There's no look. The police are busy enough. We don't need to send them to places where they don't really need to be. And I'm pleased to say that 10,000 phone calls. I've probably only called 911 15 or 20 times, maybe 30 out of 10,000 phone calls. We don't send the police very often because quite frankly, and I mean that generally, the volunteers in the National Lifeline are really pretty good at helping callers be safe, at least for now.
And that's such a volatile and very, it's sort of like a nuclear topic to talk about, is the fact of the number one rule if you go through intensive suicide prevention training is when someone is in a state of crisis at risk of imminent harm, the goal is to get the body safe. You get the body safe so that you have time to then work on the mind, work on the things that are troubling. And that looks a lot different for a lot of different people. Being in a state of crisis isn't just about 5 seconds here or 10 minutes there. Someone could be living in that distress state for days, months, weeks, and years. And when they call the Lifeline, for instance, de-escalating them in that moment doesn't mean that they're out of the woods. It means that they're in a space where now maybe they should access professional medical supports in a timely manner or something.
That's exactly right. And it's I got a call. I was on the line again this week, and I got a call from a woman who's been suffering from depression and actually thoughts of suicide for many years. And she admitted at the end of the call, it's the first time she's called the Lifeline. She kind of laughed and she goes, "I wonder why it's taking me this long to call, because this was so helpful." So, that's, again, just the encouragement is please call. Let's also make note, Carl, that especially younger people who are more comfortable texting than talking real time, there is a texting line, 741-741. If you text a word like start or help to 741-741, you can start a texting conversation. And so, you've said it so many times, there's so many resources out there, but you don't have to call the Lifeline. We would love to talk with you. I really love talking with people who need to talk, but there is a texting line if you're more comfortable with that.
And that's something to sort of drive home for folks who are watching right now, or maybe will be watching and listening in days and months beyond, is that Lifeline is actually more of a comprehensive term. Lifeline may sound like only exclusively crisis point, but obviously, as we're saying here, Lifeline is really about helping stabilize and get you in the direction of connecting with proper resources. So what the Lifeline does is it can help support wellness. You telling that story about that woman, that's the first time that she called this week, the first time she called. A lot of the times, folks going through mental challenges, because of the way stigma, it's not just a buzzword, it's the things we don't say, it's what keeps us silent. Stigma manifests as something different for everyone. It can be ethnic factors, gender factors, economic factors, geographic factors, but it's whatever makes you feel you need to stay silent, that you can't talk to other people. One of the beautiful things that the Lifeline can do is validate someone's experiences.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
You've told some great stories on the Dana Being Dana episode. You also talk about this, that, someone can know something's wrong. They didn't need Hope for the Day or a Lifeline to know something was wrong in their mind. But being able to talk to someone and feel that they're safely engaging that conversation and having it validated can be the moving the stone to go and get help. And Roger, what is that, just to like really put it into black and white, so I call, what happens? I pick up, and I dial the number or I text. What's the process look like?
Well, okay, so first of all, there's 150 call centers, and so the computer system needs to look at the phone number you're calling from, and it picks the area code and it connects you with what it thinks is the closest call center to where you're calling from. That becomes problematic now because, there's lots of people. I have two children. They both live in Washington, D.C. They both have area code 630 telephone number. So the computer system is going to think they're in Chicago. So that's a little bit problematic, but nonetheless, that's the way it works for now. And so it will connect you. Now, we're a small call center. Usually when I'm volunteering, I'm there alone. So if I'm on the line and can't take it, after a few rings, it will roll over to another call center. And all the while you're getting voice messages, of what's going on, but it'll roll over to another call center until it finally finds a call center. And that can take a period of time. So unfortunately, because most of the call centers are also short of volunteers, but that really is what happens. And you're told that, you're going to be connected to a call center, and it may take a little bit of time. So I ask people for, to have patience. But that really is the way it works. And if somebody really wants to find out, I would recommend that you go ahead and call and see how it goes. And when somebody answers, say, thank you. I was just calling to find out if this line works and how it works. And now I'm more comfortable calling again if I have a problem. So people can call just to see how it works. That's fine.
And the texting system works effectively the same way, that you're going to send a text to 741-741, and you're going to get a series of responses that it's going to try and assess, what is the intensity of your situation. You're going to get connected to a real human being who is going to be texting back. It's not some AI bot.
Right.
And one of the most fascinating things is we actually had at Hope for the Day, we had a phenomenal individual with us who out there in Kansas City. Marin, what's up, Marin? Who worked on the text line as response. And that was actually my first getting to see like her setup, what the interface looks like and things like that. Was, they have to keep it discreet, but like just seeing the platform for how they responded was phenomenal, because the Lifeline is something that gives you a chance to valve, gives you a chance to decompress, gives you a chance to de-escalate, and getting first responder responses, if it has to go to that level, is actually a form of de-escalation. If you do not feel safe or believe you're not can't get safe, rather, because going to a hospital, and it's important for people to understand this, getting hospitalized isn't fixing either. Going to the hospital, the goal is to stabilize your body, keep your body safe, and at a certain point, if you're to be released, that's to buy you time, get your body safe, to buy you time so that you can begin the process of seeking out professional mental health services, professionals who can help responsibly guide building tools or healing and things like that. The mental health process, mental health care, like any other physical process, is long and can be complicated, and there can be trial and error. Crisis response, situations for crisis response should not be, and sometimes it's misunderstood as these are fixes. You call the Lifeline and it's supposed to fix you. You go to the hospital, it's supposed to fix you. And we're trying to communicate these things so that people understand using them and not hesitating to use them for what their best purposes are. And Roger, so some of the things that we often hear about is like, so you don't have to be in a moment of crisis necessarily to call. And when I mean moment of crisis, you can feel like you're in distress, mental health distress, but you don't feel like you're about to that very moment take a physical action to harm yourself. So if people can access it to find support or find a connection, even if they don't feel like they're right in the second. What about if you don't, you talked about like if you think somebody might be at risk. So what about people who are concerned about someone else? Can they call the Lifeline? How do they access it?
Oh,
Or do you
no,
have to
absolutely.
be named?
Those are third-party callers, and we get lots of third-party callers. I got a couple of them on when I was there this week. Somebody calls and says, I've got a friend and I'm really scared. What do I do? And we'll walk people through, what are the options? We want to know, where are they? Are they alone? How well do you know them? Do you know their family? Who else do you know that you can get involved? So we'll walk them through all kinds of things until eventually the caller will say, that's really a good idea. I'm going to try that next. And so we get those kinds of calls frequently. And then, I always say, look, if that's not enough, if that didn't work, call us back immediately, and we'll talk to you about some more things that you can do. And in fact, in a third-party caller, one of the first questions I ask is, do you believe that your friend, your relative, whatever, is in danger? Because if you believe that they are in danger, then we need to hang up and you need to call 911 directly and have the police do a wellness check. Do you have time for one quick story?
Absolutely.
This goes back several months ago, and this was in another part of the country, but I got a call from a really wonderful man who was suicidal. So suicidal, in fact, he says, I don't trust myself. Could you get the police for me? And so we went through our protocols and called 911. And I said, I will stay on the phone with you until I hear that they are there. We typically do that. We don't leave the caller alone. We stay on the phone with them. Normally, when the police get there, the caller will, I'm convinced the police are there, the caller will hang up their phone, and that's all I get to hear. In this particular call, for whatever reason, the person who called me, who was suicidal, didn't hang up their phone. So I stayed on the line to hear his interaction with the police. And I have to tell you, and I know that every police department is different, but I have to tell you, those police officers were so kind to that man. They treated him so gently and with so much kindness and consideration. I was so impressed that actually I called that local police department back just to tell them how impressed I was with the bedside manner, if you will. And that's not the right term, I'm sure, for a police officer, but it just made me feel so good that I turned this man who was thinking of ending his life over to a couple of people who had tremendous compassion and generosity.
And I'm glad you brought up that story, because I think we would, especially just in this very moment, day and hour, be remiss to talk about something here that it's you, as part of the Lifeline, you have your tools to support and hope for the day and trying to help empower people to be peer support and things like that is a level. And even if I personally have a heightened level of interventional training, non-clinical interventional training for crisis response, the fact is that at some points there's intersections where law enforcement comes into play, can come into play, or should come into play. And it cannot be an 800-pound gorilla. That the fact is that for some people, the idea of even involving law enforcement into the situation is not equivalent with getting help and support and safety. And that becomes a very real thing that at a higher level of training, you do have to start to think about how can you help support someone who needs professional response and a first response level thing, but also respect the agency that there can be triggering or disruptive factors if you do involve law enforcement, and come up with strategies of how you can work on them getting to a hospital, for instance, and things like that. The reality is that in law enforcement, even if they're been, a very well-trained and caring group, there's some agencies and departments out there where no matter how sensitive the individuals are, because of a mountain of realities and protocols, the individual is going to end up in cuffs, even if they're compassionately brought to a hospital, right? And that can be traumatic. So what I'm getting at here is this is an asterisk part that in the same way that the Lifeline system has call centers, and there may actually be deficiencies in the call centers, texting system, because deficiencies mean we need more volunteers, right? At the very minimum. Talking about, well, if you're in crisis, you need to go to a hospital. Well, gosh darn it, there may not be enough beds. What if they put you on a waiting list, right? We need to acknowledge those parts, because the way we change them isn't just by, saying, oh, that's there and it's messed up. But if we can change the social policy and awareness of mental health, that empowers us to change institutional policies. We do need more volunteers, but the only way we're going to get more volunteers is to promote and make people aware and build a mandate, a public mandate for people to become volunteers. The way we get better policing that responds to mental health situations, because there's a lot of unarmed, innocent individuals whose intersections with law enforcement are from unaddressed and untreated mental health issues, that there's a failure on the law enforcement side to effectively engage them, to say nothing of the individual who may be, whether they're in a state of psychosis or just inherently mistrust someone, that those interactions with better education and better training can happen. And the better training and better interaction only comes when there's people who are demanding that's what their institutions have, their law enforcement, their fire, et cetera. So where I'm going with that here, because that's not your responsibility to be the lead and the reformer of all those things, but it's important for us that we don't ever want to sugarcoat anything that we're talking about. And it's under that context of understanding, even with those deficiencies and realities, the Lifeline is still a critical tool for you as an individual. If you find yourself whether in imminent risk of harming yourself that moment, or a general unease that you're just unsure about and you want to talk to someone and you don't feel like you have any other outlet, the Lifeline can support you. The Lifeline can help be a place to listen and hear you out and validate. If you're concerned for someone, if you're concerned for someone around you, and it could be a vague concern,
right?
You don't have to have actually seen them in the motions. Call the Lifeline. They can help either affirm with you, or hell's bells, even if there is someone who's actually in imminent risk, they can help walk you through how to effectively respond.
Right.
So you don't have to memorize. And Roger, with that, over 17 years, you've had a lot of different interactions, and I think it would be interesting to know what have been maybe one or two that have stood out to you as sort of, I don't know, I don't want to prompt it, like I feel like it's inappropriate to prompt it as like success stories or things like that, but what have been sort of calls that have stuck with you, respecting people's privacy or whatever, to that level? What have been some experiences that have stuck with you and have impacted how you operate as a Lifeline operator?
There are just so many, and again, for confidentiality reasons. But one that comes up a lot, and this really breaks my heart, is a parent will call who is suffering from some mental illnesses of some kind, and they have young children, and they call saying, you know what, my child would be better off if I wasn't here. My child shouldn't have to grow up dealing with my mental illness. And I did this recently. So tell me all of the reasons, honestly, why you think it'd be better to end your life. And we go through that list without arguing, without, okay, I get that. I understand that. Yes. Okay, I understand. So what are the reasons why, why you shouldn't? And one caller said to me, I love my child like no other person ever will. I said, that's it. I said, that's it. All of those reasons why you think your child would be better off without you are just blown away by the fact that you love them more than anybody else ever could. And the child will never be the same if you withdraw that love and withdraw your presence. Children are very resilient. Children can learn to live with parents who have mental illnesses and probably will learn some valuable things from that. So that's just one example. Another one that comes up frequently, and especially now with the coronavirus, COVID-19, people are overwhelmed. I had all of those things I had to do before to run my life, and now my kids are home and my spouse is home, and now I have to be everything to everybody, and I just can't do it all. And so then it's a question of, with one caller, I said, so let's talk about priorities. And what's the one thing that you're not getting to that you think is the most important? And she says, I'm not being the parent that I would like to be for my children. And I said to her, well, can it be okay for now, for all of those other things not to get done to perfection so that you have time to be mom? And there was a sigh of relief. That was the simple question. Can it be okay for all of those other things, for not all the dishes to be done and the laundry doesn't all get done immediately? Can that all be okay so you have time to be? And you could hear the sigh of relief in her voice when she said, yes, for now that could be okay. I can let myself be imperfect. So, there's just, I don't know. But like I say, there's hundreds, but it's always that sense at the end of thank you so much for being there. I just needed someone to talk with.
Thank you, Roger, so much for sharing that. I think that that's a perfect way to sort of wrap up tonight. I want to double, triple down that the Lifeline, there's a lot of different resources. Hopefully that it exists initially because it's easier for people to connect with us sometimes than it is to talk to someone in their physical space. And obviously we provide education and outreach, but the Lifeline is an option. When you think of groups like NAMI, who has the helpline that's out there, and if you go to
great organization,
wonderful group, and if you go to HFTD.org, hopefully today's website, when you click on the Find Help section, you'll see there's different lifelines from different countries and things like that, but we also have a resource finder, and we call it the resource compass. It helps you, it's more than just type in a zip code and you get a list of private practices. It provides information towards direct services like hospitals and clinicians, but it also provides things such as access to food pantries or places to find support for managing bills, because these can all be things that impact your quality of life. And you sharing that story about a parent who's, among the things that may have been leading to them finding distress, believing that they weren't being the person that society demands of us right now. And I think your stories and your insight should help people, if you're listening right now or in days moving forward, to understand, why we say it's okay not to be okay isn't because when you're not okay, you just deal with it and just live in it like that. But being able to embrace it's okay not to be okay is about being able to reset your mind that the things that might be distressing you or troubling you, there's a process to fix them. There's a path, and it can take a lot of time, but being able to get your mind set that there is that forward motion, that it is possible, that there are resources and supports out there, that it's not going to suck forever, to put it, in non-vernacular. That's the goal, because when we talk about people in crisis, and I say this as someone who lived experience as a suicide survivor multiple times myself, the biggest difference between me when I was in a persistent state of harm, of potential risk of harming myself, and now is not that everything inside the head is fine and stable. It's that I have a firm grasp on understanding that my trials and struggles aren't necessarily permanent and infinite, and that tomorrow can be another day and all the good stuff. But that in this moment, I don't have those moments where I'm convinced it's always going to suck, that it's completely hopeless, etc. It doesn't fix everything. And the Lifeline and being an operator on the Lifeline, that's effectively what you are providing to people, is giving them perspective, at least for that moment, that, it's not that what they're going through is going to be dissolved when they hang up the phone, but that there is a possibility that they can give themselves a chance to find the tools to improve that better. And that's so critical. You're saving lives, Roger, and for all the people.
So let me just, as a postscript to that, because people say that to me all the time, that golly, you saved a lot of lives. And my answer to that always is, on the Lifeline, none of us save lives, but we get the privilege of being on the phone when somebody chooses to save their own.
Well, shit, I'm not going to top that. That's perfect.
Listen, Carl, it is such a pleasure to get to know you. And let me leave you with this final thought. Because of Hope for the Day, all the rest of us can have more hope for the future.
Okay, well, I'm just not going to say anything after that. So say that one more time, Roger.
Because of Hope for the Day, all the rest of us can have more hope for the future.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank Roger. I want to thank Dana Michelle. I want to thank our co-producers, Rick Osowski, Mike Vinopal, and Vicky Zisnet, and our sponsors, AFSP and Johnson & Johnson. And this has been Conversations Cafe. Have a wonderful night. Thank you very much. Roger, have an excellent, excellent evening.
Thank you very much. I will.
Mental health, like physical health, is something we all have. When we talk about mental health, it's usually about depression, anxiety, and thoughts of suicide. But what's not said is that it affects us all. Think of our mind like a bottle of soda. Life shakes us up. And inside, the pressure builds. That pressure is looking for somewhere to go. And if we don't release it, it grows. It grows to the point where we can't enjoy the things we used to, we can't leave the house, or even get out of bed. You have to find moments to open up and release it. It can be as small as sitting still and taking a deep breath. When we talk to each other about what's bothering us, the cap comes off and pressure releases. Forget the stigma, all of us need to talk about our mental health. Start the conversation with Hope for the Day. We are in this together.